on, guys? Welcome back to the You Know Ball podcast. I am your host, Trill Bro Dude, and today I am excited to have onto the podcast for the first time from Nets Daily. We have Matt Brooks. What's going on, Matt?
Yo, thank you for having me on. I've actually been watching a ton of your free agency streams. I've been just binging them. They've been hilarious, informative. I swear to God, I'm not just gassing you up right now. I really have been watching the hell out of these. So I was super honored when you reached out on Twitter.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope that you don't think less of me of a person, because those streams can get a little bit wild for anyone that the podcast is a little bit more professional. We'll get on here, we'll talk about things, we'll joke about things, but the streams get really unhinged where we're doing 2 hours in, we're doing like pretending to be the mismatch and having Sam do Chris Vernon impersonations, and just it goes off the rails really fast. But I do appreciate that, especially because now today is the perfect time to have you on. I actually reached out to you yesterday. How weird is it that this news comes out today after I reached out to you?
Yeah, it was, all of it was weird. Just because just as I said, I was watching your stuff, and it kind of, during the pandemic, I did a bunch of streams where we'd watch old Nets games and just kind of riff for 2 hours, and God knows what was said. But for you to reach out and then for us to get all this stuff about, KD and the Six, this is the second time that the Nets and the Sixers have been linked in the last, 6 months. So I think it's only fitting that I come on today.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. So it all starts the other day with another Shams report about Kevin Durant, which is that the division within the Nets is basically that he went to Joseph Tsai and said, it's either me or Sean Marks and Steve Nash. So the Nets have basically kind of said they still want to try to run it back. I don't know if that's for posturing's sake, if that's actually what they want to do. What the hell? What the hell is ever going on with the Nets? But what is your read on this situation right now?
All right, so there's two parts to this. That request, if we're going to call it that, was clearly done in my opinion, and from the little bits and pieces that I know. Durant made that request knowing that it's going to be shot down. And it was, by the way, by Joe Tsai on Twitter, literally 20 minutes after, which I've never seen. I've never seen an owner do that after, just basically address a report that you could just say is, unsubstantiated. But, that was pretty much out there. From the Nets side, they do want to run it back. This is what we're looking at right now, is a power struggle between two sides. If you want to say team KD, team Kyrie to a lesser degree, but really just KD versus the Nets front office, we're looking at two sides that want to try to take some sort of power. And I think Durant recognizes right now which side ownership is going to go with. And let's be real, it's going to be management and coaching, which is, I think, to the chagrin of a lot of Nets fans, not what they want to hear. But I think that's what you're looking at right now, is a request that was made by Durant, knowing what the answer was going to be. And then on the flip side of things, this is the Nets saying, hey, we want to take our culture back. We want to run things how we want to, because we've kind of catered to you guys over the last couple of years. And what has it really brought us? One playoff series win. Yeah.
And that's kind of where the conflict is. It's this culture. And it's funny because whenever I've had Reed Wallach on the pod before, and whenever Reed comes on, he always talks about what Steve Jones says, which is, you build the culture to get the stars. And this is kind of what the situation that happened here was. They built this culture with the team that we'll talk about in a little bit. Back in 18-19, they became appealing enough that they basically were like, hey, we're not the Knicks, which is a huge thing when you're in New York City and you're trying to recruit free agents, because if guys want to live in New York, all you have to be is pretty competent, seem like you know what you're doing. And for all things considered, the Nets definitely did, which is why this makes this whole thing confusing to me, is the fact that something that a lot of people have pointed out, not just me, is the fact that Kevin Durant is mad at Sean Marks and Steve Nash. Now they're backing off of the fact that he wanted Steve Nash as coach. Is that true? Was that something that is now coming out because he just wants to distance himself? And also, was he not involved in most of the decisions that were being made? Every story that came out made it seem like he was being like LeBron.
Yeah, man, the Steve Nash thing is really complicated. It's at this point I can't tell if we're getting like revisionist history in a way, because it seems like the narrative now is that, oh, this was a Sean Marks hire. Durant wasn't really involved. He just signed off on it. But when the story was reported, it was more of like, hey, Durant really liked working with him in Golden State, and this is kind of how Steve Nash got here. So to me, that suggests that we're getting that story now, the one that says, hey, this isn't really a Durant thing. I kind of feel like we're looking at a little bit of revisionist history there. I could be wrong, though.
Okay.
That one's really complicated. In terms of roster moves, I mean, you look at like all the moves, like LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin 2 years ago. I know my guy Mike Scotto reported that James Johnson last year was another guy that Durant signed off on. So, yeah, those are moves that like were brought in by Durant. And I think you could say in large part, most of those moves were failures outside of Blake Griffin for what, the one maybe two playoff series. So, I mean, it is kind of puzzling in a way. I will say from, and I'll give Durant this. I think how the Nets have handled this offseason, and again, I get it from their side to a degree, saying, hey, like we let you run the ship and it got us nowhere. But how they've handled certain decisions this offseason, the Kyrie thing is one thing, whatever, if you don't want to give him a long-term deal. I mean, there isn't really a competitive market for him right now. So
exactly.
What's he going to do?
Yeah.
But there are little things. They fired the assistant coach, Adam Harrington, who is a guy that Durant's known since really like his OKC days. And that I thought was a move that to me suggested a little bit of spite, a little bit of revenge in a way.
Gotcha.
And in my opinion, I'm like, I just don't really know the upside of doing that if you're trying to keep arguably I don't even know if it's arguably like a top 10 player of all time.
Yeah,
I don't understand that.
At worst, top 15.
Sure.
We're talking about one of the greatest basketball talents of all time.
Yeah, and it's just like, I don't know why you would do that over an assistant coaching position. At the end of the day, like teams have assistants. Like there's a lot of them, they come in and out the door. And I don't understand the upside of doing that if it means the downside is losing somebody like Kevin Durant. It just, to me, it felt petty. And I'm not going to say that the Nets front office has been perfect in this whole thing either. For as many mistakes as, I guess the Durant and Kyrie Nets made along the way.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely another element to it. There is a personal element to it, which is these connections that are being formed behind the scenes, not the things that we're seeing every day, the roster moves that we'll talk about and the things that, Shams is tweeting and Woj and whatever. Like there are clearly always things going on behind the scenes. But like you said, it did seem like the culture had kind of shifted in the direction of KD and Kyrie are kind of going to do whatever they want when they first got there. And maybe there's been a little bit of that power struggle to get that back. And it has caused this conflict because, like you said, some things have not gone great, obviously. The biggest one hanging over all of this, which is what we'll talk about right now, is the James Harden thing, is the fact that they went all the way in for James Harden, who Kevin Durant wanted to play in Brooklyn. They gave all of their draft picks up. They gave up Jared Allen, who's become an all-star. They gave up everything to get a guy who within a year asked out, forced his way to the Sixers, and had seemingly a falling out with Kevin Durant. And now they're, going on a best friends tour of Europe together. So once again, what the hell is going on?
Can I address one thing? Because you mentioned this culture thing, because the Nets are pushing this right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing I don't want to say I vehemently disagree with it, but I compare it to like, let's say you're in a multi-year relationship, right? You're with somebody for 3 years.
I like this. This is a Rosillo analogy.
This is a very. I'm not going to go like. I hope not. I hope this is not. I hope not. Don't do that to me. But it's like you're in a multi-year relationship, and then in year 4, you just flip everything on its head. Everything that was how it was going, you're just like, we're not actually going to do that anymore. Like, we played to your rules, we're going to play to mine. That's kind of how I feel like this offseason has gone a little bit for the Nets in a way, which to me, I get it. You want to take back the culture. I just don't know if you can do that on a whim with 3 guys or 2 guys really, but 3 when Harden was there, that you've placated to. Yeah, I know. Whatever. Any amount of superstars that were there, you did that and placated to every demand that they made for 3 years. It's just, to me, again, everybody is blameless. I think in this situation is kind of what I want to hammer home today, is that everybody, or not blameless, everybody has some sort of blame when it comes to, this whole situation and where we are. So speaking on the Harden to KD thing, I don't know. I was
throw my hands up.
I'll put it like this. There's a lot of differing opinions, reports, whatever, on what happened, why Harden left, and there's a lot that went into that. There's a lot that Harden put into play in terms of trying to execute that, trying to figure out his way out. But I think the big thing for me was that there was division within that locker room. There were factions. There were sides that were butting heads. There was, really long periods of times where these guys just wouldn't address each other. They wouldn't speak with each other. And the biggest thing, maybe of anything, was between the two guys that are now at a Travis Scott concert together, having a great time. And to me, for that to happen, what are we, 6-7 months later, after everything that happened, after all of the division that we had behind the scenes, specifically between those two guys, is wild to me. But that's the NBA, man. That's how it is. Yeah,
this is, like we said, it's reality television, dude. It's all of it is it fluctuates. How people act in public versus private is very different. But this whole element of, we hear about, first off, I heard about, everyone on Twitter heard they were hanging out in LA last week. And it was like they were working out together, and we were like, okay, so KD and Harden are working out together. Like, how much truth is there to this, really? And then we saw pictures of them like out at a nightclub, and we're like, okay, so then James Harden's in his element. Like, he's not bringing just anyone to the nightclub with him. Like, you're on good terms with James Harden if you're going out with him. So they get spotted out there. Then they're at the Travis Scott thing, which I described as like they're coming together for the kids. Like, Travis Scott's their mutual friend. They had a bad divorce. They had a bad breakup. But if they could make it work for Travis, they'll try to make it work. But then we get another thing of people saying that they see them in Barcelona. So they're going from LA to England to Barcelona together. So, like, that really starts like sending off signals in my head. Like, of course, my first thought as a Sixers fan was like, could this really be the first step to recruiting KD to try to come to the Sixers? Obviously, the big elephant in the room with that whole thing, when Embiid was trying to recruit KD, like, he immediately, when we found out, like, Jason Dumas reported and was like, Embiid really wants KD. He's going to make a push for him. Like, they're going to do everything in their power to get Kevin Durant. But the issue, obviously, is the fact that there are these teams. There are the Celtics, the Raptors, the Pelicans, these teams that have they have most of their picks, if not all of their picks. In the Pelicans case, they have more picks than that. They also have prospects that the Nets would be interested in, because the Nets want to stay competitive now. They don't have most of their draft picks. And the Sixers are a little bit asset poor, I guess you could say. Yeah. They obviously have Tyrese Maxey. They obviously have Tobias Harris for matching salary, which, Long Island guy, I'm just pitching it to you, dude. Look, want to pay Tobias Harris $80 million over the next 2 years? I'm going to tell you right now, there were a lot of people, a lot of Nets fans that said, you know what? This would be a good offseason. I think it was 2019. We got Tobias Harris. This would be a big win for us. We could put him next to D'Angelo Russell and let's go.
Karis LeVert, like
the fake all-star team.
We could be the 5 seed next year. So
yeah,
this brings me back a little bit. No, sorry.
It's full circle. No, I remember that because you guys had cap space, and I think it was a plan B thing. They were like, if they don't get KD and Kyrie, go after Tobias, and like, obviously we were like, great, we just traded for this guy, and now we're gonna have to overpay for him. And here we are a few years later, absolutely overpaying for him, about to go into his last 2 years where he makes almost $80 million in those years. But the whole point on this is that obviously the Sixers don't have the best package that it appears. Like, I think there are other teams that could make more competitive offers, but my whole thing is like, who's going to make that offer? Because The Raptors, if you're not getting Scotty Barnes, you should not make a trade with the Raptors. Get the fuck out of here with that OG Anunoby, Gary Trent bullshit. Absolutely not. That is a joke. If you believe whatever Bobby Marks, who we'll talk about it at some point today, if you believe any of that is realistic, you're an insane person.
I love Raptors fans, man. I love them. Like I saw a tweet today I think it was under the Bobby Marks tweet, and it was like, all right, if we're giving up OG, like, why do we need to give up 4 picks? I'm like, bro, I love you guys. You guys rule. It's so good.
For anyone who's listening, I just collapsed into a chair next to me. They have the perfect brains. It's almost like they're like test subjects, and Canada is just a nation where we go to breed basketball psychos now.
Who's the draft pick that they took in the first round?
Christian Koloko.
I've seen more about him than anybody in the lottery. I like this guy better be amazing.
He was a second round pick.
He was a second rounder. Okay,
he was like the 35th pick or something.
I was at the draft, so I should know this. But I love Raptors fans. So
yeah, they're great. But yeah, so if you're making a trade, like, let alone like, you're not even getting Pascal Siakam. Like, I'm not even the biggest Pascal Siakam guy, but if you're trading Kevin Durant, you better get someone who's going to be in the all-star conversation, if not now, in the future, which is part of the idea behind the Maxey thing personally. But if the Celtics are willing to offer Jaylen Brown, but you want more, the report comes out today that he wants to play. Kevin Durant doesn't seem to understand that, like, what he demands on the open market in a trade. Like, you can't go to Miami and play with Bam and Jimmy and Lowry. First off, they don't even have the salary to make that work. Second off, you can't go to Boston and play with Marcus Smart if the Nets want Marcus Smart. Like, that's just not how these things work. But long story short, unless the Pelicans offer Brandon Ingram or the Celtics offer Jaylen Brown, I don't think that the Sixers package is the most insane thing in the world if we didn't just have this whole debacle with Ben Simmons and James Harden. Because I think everything that the Nets front office and everything that Nets ownership has shown is that they do care about these things. Like, they care about the culture, they care about the image, they care about, like, not looking stupid, basically. And if you then turn around and go, oh, the guy that just, tried to blow up the team and we traded him to Philly for a guy who hasn't even played for us yet, we're gonna trade KD to go play with him. Like, that's the part of the thing that makes it less realistic to me. It's not even the asset part of it.
Yeah, and like, let's be real, like, all the Nets have done is look stupid for the last year. Like, they traded every pick I'm sorry, but like, let's be real. Like,
it's true, yeah.
They have. Like, they traded every pick they had for Harden. That blows up. They have this whole vaccine debacle. I don't even want to say the word vaccine after the last year. I don't want to talk about that at all. That happens. Even Ben Simmons, like, he's on the bench one game, and then the next game he's not there. It's just like every little thing has just been this, just like, it's been a hit to, I think, the ego of the team. So I think that's a major reason why we are where we are. And I do think that's going to affect things. Like, there is a lot of pride from an ownership level and probably a little bit in management as well that I think comes into play here. I want to say one thing, and I think you talk about, Durant doesn't fully realize that, hey, you can't, play with Marcus Smart. I hear you to a degree, but like, there also just isn't really that market. Like, when the Jaylen Brown thing came out and it was like him and Derek White and a couple picks.
Yeah.
I did a radio, I think, in Toronto, and they kind of asked me about that, and I said, I'll be real with you, like, I don't think that the end package, like, let's say we get there, looking at where the market was then, Toronto still didn't want to put Scotty Barnes on the table, which is the main point of discussion. The Pelicans are kind of this fringe team. We don't really know. It seems a little bit risky, I think, in a way, to make a trade for Durant when we don't really know what Zion's going to look like. They kind of feel like a fringe team. It's really hard for me to see. They feel like a team that's going to make that deal like at the deadline if they start off really hot or something like that. So let's say this deal gets done now. It's really going to be between Boston, I guess, Philly now potentially. Maybe. And if I'm Boston, I'm like, why am I bidding against myself in a way? Like, all right, we'll give you Grant Williams also and Derek White. and Jaylen Brown and 3 picks. And there you go. And it's like, what are the Nets going to do? I mean, other than, I guess, just hold out and hope you have a James Harden situation from, or really probably better comparison is a Ben Simmons situation from last year, which, by the way, I don't think that's commonplace. I don't think that's something that happens all the time. The Sixers got very lucky, very, very lucky in a way that this thing blew up the way it did in Brooklyn because of a once in a generation pandemic. Like, let's be real.
Yeah.
So
hopefully,
yeah.
I just knocked on this wooden table here just in case.
Me too. I'm knocking on.
I've been reading too much about monkeypox. Please,
Yeah, it's in New York. Let's not bring that up, man.
I know. I'm sorry.
It's not
sensitive subject. Right. So, I totally agree with that. I totally understand that. If you are Kevin Durant, you're like looking around and you're saying, well, maybe the market isn't that great. If we can keep Marcus Smart there, we have a better chance to win, all this stuff. I'm going to come out and say it. I actually think Tyrese Maxey is a better trade asset than Jaylen Brown. And I know that sounds insane, but Jaylen Brown has 2 years left on his deal. And you cannot extend him. This is a big deal. Yep. You cannot extend Jaylen Brown until he is a free agent. I'll say it again. You cannot extend Jaylen Brown until he is a free agent. Like, you could trade for Jaylen Brown, and as the Nets in their history has shown, they've traded for guys and they've wanted out in a year, in 2 years. And you have the potential of a guy coming there, whatever situation's going on with Ben Simmons and Kyrie, if he's still there, if you don't trade him for Russ and whatever you can get with picks, there is a possibility that Jaylen Brown goes there and that blows up. And then you have Jaylen Brown walking. Tyrese Maxey, if you trade for Tyrese Maxey, who maybe I'm a little bit higher on Maxey because I'm a Sixers fan.
I'm also very high. I've been high since the draft. Yeah.
Same. And like, I was a pre-draft Maxey guy. Maxey and Bane were my guys. So I feel very vindicated. Don't ask about the 2021 draft. My guys fucking suck from that draft. But my guys from the 2020 draft were very good. Yeah. And Maxey was one of the two. And in this whole thing is like, I feel like both in 2 years from now, Jaylen Brown and Tyrese Maxey will be similar level of players probably to me. Maybe you like Jaylen Brown a little bit more because he's bigger and he is a two-way wing and all of that stuff. But if he's your best player, your team's not going anywhere anyway.
Yeah, right.
So like that's been my whole thing is like, if you're moving on from Kyrie, he's going to be your best player immediately. The Maxey thing is like, you have him on a rookie contract still, and then you're going to have like, minimum, you have him for 5 more years. Maximum, you have him for 7 more years. And on top of that, you can actually extend him off of his rookie contract and not worry about losing him in the same way that you would lose Jaylen Brown. And look, we don't have a ton of picks. I'm not going to say we do. But you guys own the 27 pick, which we can then remove the protections from. And then we can trade a swap in 28 and an unprotected 29, plus we can trade swaps in the off years around those picks. Like earlier, like I think if the Sixers were like, we need to make a push for Kevin Durant, and the Nets were actually open to the idea that Daryl Morey would be sick enough to throw literally everything. Like they said, we're going to take every asset we possibly can in a trade. Even though the Sixers are a little bit pick poor, even though they only have this one prospect in Tyrese Maxey that's really desirable, I still think that like if Boston's like, we're not gonna bid against ourselves and we're gonna lowball you guys for Kevin Durant, then the Sixers can be in the conversation, and that might drive up the price.
Which they should, by the way. They just went to the finals. Like if I'm Boston, I'm like, why are we exactly doing this? Like why are we putting ourselves in this position where if this doesn't work, all of a sudden we don't have the depth, the assets going forward. You know, there's no reason for us to do this in a way. I mean, again, like it really depends, I guess, on the general manager. Some GMs are like, we're here, we need to get up here, you know, and they really, I mean, they were what, like a half away from going up 3-1 on Golden State. Like they can sell themselves pretty easily on saying, hey, we were almost there. Philly's interesting. And by the way, so you mentioned all the swaps and all the things that Daryl can do. If you're Sean Marks, you're the Nets. You know, everything that's transpired over the last year specifically between Kevin Durant and James Harden. You know what those two personalities are like. You know, you have Steve Nash still there. He's seen how those guys interact. I don't know why, if you're the Nets, and let's say the Boston offer just is a low ball offer, you're like, this sucks. Like, this is just not doing it. Not a great look. If you're the Nets, I almost feel like you can sell yourself on the Sixers. And again, I'm not saying we're going to get there. Like, this is a lot of ifs going on. But if you're the Nets and that Celtics offer just never improves, you never get to a point where you feel like, all right, we're going to be in good shape. We have a couple picks coming in. We kind of feel like the Celtics team is going to be pretty good in the future. So really, we're just bringing in Jaylen Brown, who we don't know if is going to extend. You could probably sell yourself a little bit on Philly saying, ooh, we got Harden and KD in the room. Two guys that Harden's kind of a, outspoken guy. But if things go wrong, Harden can, he can kind of detach a little bit. And KD's somebody that be pretty spiteful. I mean, it's very clear. Like, when things start going wrong, he'll be a little more. He won't be he won't detach in the same way that Harden will, but he'll be a little more roundabout about it. But you have two guys that like kind of are the same way. When things start going wrong and they don't feel like things are right and not how they want them to be, things can change very quickly. So I think if you're the Nets, you'd say, okay, cool, we'll take every pick we can get from this team.
Yeah, and look. I've thought for a while, if you're a team that is trying to make trade, like you guys already own our 27 pick, like you just traded the 23 pick, but the Sixers are going to be good next year. Even if they're whatever happens, they'll be good enough that the pick won't really matter. You guys traded that for Royce O'Neal. Like, that's fine. Mm-hmm. I actually think like what you're saying totally makes sense to me, because not only all of that, they're old. Like,
yep.
Like, if you can get the Sixers picks you can get a swap in 24. You can get once again, they pretty much have to remove all protections. That's the complicated part of this. They pretty much have to remove every protection from every pick that's already out. So OKC has one pick. The Jazz have one pick. The Nets have the 27 pick. Like, they'd have to remove all of those protections, which is very risky and something that Daryl Morey's actually never really done. He doesn't trade unprotected picks. Like, he's traded, it's usually top 3 protected, sometimes top 4. That's generally speaking been his philosophy. But like you said, they're older. Joel Embiid has a injury history. And like, if they're trading off Tyrese Maxey, who's realistically their only good, impactful young prospect, then, except for maybe Paul Reed, but like Paul Reed's probably included in the deal anyway. And if he isn't, like, he's not going to become some sort of superstar.
This is how I know this is a Sixers podcast, because Paul Reed was brought up.
Okay. Here's the thing with Paul Reed. He's not Matisse Thybulle. So I'm not going to sit here and say, like, people throw Thybulle's name in there. And I'm like, if I'm a team, I'd rather have Paul Reed than Matisse Thybulle. Because at least Paul Reed, I know, is like, vaccinated and like,
please no more. Please no more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Have fun playing Toronto again next year. And my whole thing on this is like the Sixers, their window past the next few years, if they made an all-in trade, is like their floor is very low. Like, their floor is like worst team in the league, bad potential. And the Celtics, on the other hand, have Jason Tatum, who, like, if they make that trade, like, I will say, like, Tatum's really good. I do worry about their 10-year future, maybe, as opposed to like, because they're giving up everything that they could build on to be good for the next 5 to 10 years to be good for the next 3 to 4 years, which is a bet that I'm willing to make with Kevin Durant and Jason Tatum on the same team. Like, I'd absolutely do that if I were them. But you could sell yourself on that. But Jason Tatum is younger than Joel Embiid. He's 3 years earlier on his contract cycle. And on top of that, you can supermax him, keep him on his next deal in Boston for at least 6 or 7 more years. So they're going to be good for 6 or 7 years.
And he's durable.
He's durable. He doesn't get hurt.
Yep.
Like, this idea that like the Celtics future picks are going to be super, like, if you make that kind of trade, they might be okay in a few years. And you're like, all right, you're looking at some middling picks if they can't really build around Tatum once they make this kind of all-in move. But I'm willing to bet that the Celtics immediate future and long-term future is better than the Sixers if they were to make this kind of trade.
Yeah, this was kind of why I liked Phoenix originally, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Like, when the stuff first came out, people were saying, oh, the Nets should try to get, I don't know, I don't even know who was involved at that point. There have been so many teams, but yeah, I always was kind of like, hey, I kind of think the Nets, yeah, sure. Can you sell yourself on 8? I don't know. But I always felt like if you get, let's say you get 4 picks and 3 swaps from Phoenix, and you're like, all right, all of a sudden you're betting on a team with 37-year-old Chris Paul, Kevin Durant, who's 34. And by the way, if things don't go well, there's really, at this point, based on what we've seen, there's no real assurance that he's going to stay there long term. Yeah, sure, he might love Monty Williams. And that was really going to be one of the big drivers for that, was that he loves Monty. Okay, is that really the guarantee that you need if you're a Suns fan, or if you're in the Suns front office saying, all right, we got Kevin Durant for the long term? No. And like, if those 2 guys leave, all of a sudden it's Devin Booker by himself. Maybe Booker wants to leave. You don't know. So for me, I looked at that situation and I was like, all right, that seems volatile. Like that team is predicated on 2 older guys and a younger star that if it's just him, I mean, Booker's already been there in the, in the mud, essentially, with him just kind of doing it with whoever around him. So when that first happened, I said, I kind of think I like this Suns package a little bit more. The Sixers are another excellent example of that, where, yeah, like you're betting on, a guy that's, I love Harden. I do. Declining. Durant, who's had some injury issues and is at this point a little bit of, think of a wild card in terms of knowing that he's going to be in long term. And then Embiid, who, again, we've said it, like, there's injury concerns there. He's had
injuries literally since the time that we knew who he was. Like that's his history. And like, odds are he's not going to be playing deep into his 30s. We'll say that much. Like, he's almost 30 right now. Like, we could be talking about in 3 or 4 years from now, where it's like, he's not even half the player that he is now, and he's never healthy and all this stuff. Like, that's a realistic possibility, which is why I think savvy teams like OKC looked at the 2025 pick and they were like, yeah, we want that.
Yeah.
like give us the 2025 pick. We'll take our chances on Joel Embiid aging out or being injured and the team falling apart, because Morey's going to make all these all-in moves now that we can bet on it in the future. And like, I would really like to be on the side of that if I were a team. Now, there's a lot of other factors, which we already talked about, which is like, it's probably not going to happen because of the ego, because of of how this whole soap opera happened, and they don't want to admit defeat and blah, blah, blah. But from a purely, like, if you want future assets, you can get Maxey on a rookie deal plus some picks plus whatever else needs to be done to be, I shouldn't say a ton of picks, a bunch of swaps and some picks. Like, to me, it's just not the worst package in the world the way that people are making it out to be. And I'm going to be honest, I still think that people think that Maxey is not that good because of where he was drafted. Like, part of it is probably the fact that he's like small, like he's like 6'1", 6'2", and he's not a big dude. And like if we look at the future of the NBA, like the future of the NBA is moving towards what seems like these super big wing, big skilled guys. And I totally understand that. But this is a guy that like dropped 39 points in his first ever career playoff start a few months ago. And also a guy who won the Sixers a game 6 on the road in Atlanta last year when Ben Simmons was in foul trouble, and it literally saved the series. Like, this is a guy who's already had multiple playoff moments early in his career. And statistically, if you look at his numbers and you compare them to like Donovan Mitchell, Jamal Murray, all the guys that are included in these kind of star packages, Maxey is like right on line with them, if not better, like for their age. And I feel like people are overlooking that because of the fact that he's his size and the fact that everyone cannot admit that the NBA makes mistakes in the draft sometimes. Tyrese Maxey should have been a top 5 pick, and it's ridiculous he wasn't, is my whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm high on Max, and I also feel like we get a little too, like, we get a little too horny about certain labels. Like, we're just like, so we just love big wings. Like, that's just thrown out. Yeah, it's just love big wings.
Love it.
It's like, dude, if a guy is a guy, like he's got that in him. I don't know. He's got that dog in him. He's got that dog in him. But no, like, you watch him and you're like, this is just like a good basketball player. I don't know. So that's just personally me. And you're looking at you're looking at Maxey versus Jaylen Brown. I like that you said that those guys are comparable, not in terms of like how they play or anything like that, but those are probably like second star, third star guys. Like that's at their peak, which I think, Jaylen Brown's gonna be 26 by the start of next year.
And by the way, I've been very when people have been down on Jaylen Brown, I'm like, no, I want that guy on my team in the playoffs. Like that, like I feel like everyone gets caught up with the regular season shit because his numbers aren't always that great in the regular season and he's inconsistent, all this stuff. And I'm like, every playoffs comes around and guys like Jaylen Brown just have massive games when you really need them to. And that has been, and this is, I was not talking down on Jaylen Brown earlier. Like, I actually think if anything, he might be a little bit underrated by like the nerd advanced stat crowd that like just doesn't consider that like there are 16 game players and there are 82 game players and Jaylen Brown is a 16 game player.
Yeah. No, I agree. And no, I mean, he was one of my biggest takeaways from this year's playoffs was like, man, I'm really a lot more of a Jaylen Brown guy than I thought.
He's
I was.
awesome.
Like he's just awesome. Everything pops in a way. He just seems to have big games and big moments. But
despite not being able to dribble basketball, he's amazing.
But that's the problem though.
Yeah,
if you're Brooklyn, you're bringing him in as like the number one option. It's like, all right, you're seeing increased defensive attention. All of a sudden you're not playing next to Jason Tatum. All of a sudden you're Jaylen Brown and you're being guarded primarily by Wiggins versus, Tatum is the guy that's seeing that type of attention.
Sure.
So I think that stuff is also worth, keeping in mind in a way. If you're a Nets fan who's saying, well, we get this guy, he could be like, second team all NBA. I'm like, all right, but like, let's just see him as the main guy because we have not seen that. And that stuff matters a lot. Contextually, that stuff matters a lot in the NBA.
Yeah. And I think that the reason, like, if Tyrese Maxey was 4 inches taller and a little bit bigger, I would probably be like, he could potentially be a number one option. Guys his size, that it's an outlier when they are the number one option, like Damian Lillard and Steph Curry and Donovan Mitchell. Like, it just does not really happen all that often, which is probably why I think I cap Maxey's ceiling a little bit more than I would for some of these other prospects that we're talking about in the Kevin Durant deals. But I also am just like, I don't want to bet against this dude because every time I feel like I do, it's like if you go back and listen to my podcast, how I talked about him when we first got him, like that's when the podcast started. I literally, the first episode I ever did was me melting down about the Nets getting Harden and like being like, oh, we're fucked and this sucks and whatever. Funny enough, we're here. But like the thing with Maxey is I have been constantly blown away with how much better he wants to get, with how hard he works, all that stuff. Like, if there's anyone that can overcome all of the physical limitations that he might have and maybe become the guy on a team, I would not bet against Tyrese Maxey, even though I understand all of the reservations that people might have. Like, if you told me in a few years from now he's the number one option on a good team, I would not be shocked, just because I know he's still super young. He works incredibly hard, and he just is like, he's got that dog in him, as we said. And that's the most important thing to me. You just got that dog in you, and that's the most important. But realistically, if we're projecting out, like you said, second, third kind of guy, kind of similar in that Jaylen Brown mold, in that secondary complementary thing, if he is not like the main guy that the defense has their attention on, he can attack second. Like, he's amazing as a attacking closeouts, hitting shots off the catch, cutting, doing everything that you want your secondary guys to do on offense. It's like he was like unbelievable, like a fucking like a NOS button after we got Harden, like with Harden and Embiid. He's just been absolutely incredible. And it would also, by the way, break my heart to trade away one of my favorite players, even though you're getting Kevin Durant back. Like there are a handful of guys in the league that, like, I've said it before on this podcast, there's only like 6 or 7 guys I probably wouldn't trade for Kevin Durant. And like, I feel like we're having collective amnesia when people talk about like a guy who everyone said was definitively the best player in the world in the playoffs last year. And now we're all like, yeah, I don't know. Like, do you really want to include like that many picks, like Jaylen Brown and like
OG Anunoby? I don't know. Have you seen?
I don't know, dude. All I'm saying is Chris Boucher is the Malachi Flynn. Just give him another year.
He's looked good in Pro-Am. I don't know if you've seen it. Yeah, I mean, I think, I just want to add this. I think lost in a lot of this is also, we go back to the ego of the Nets. We're going to call it that, right? The Nets brain trust. One thing to think about is, for as much as we can talk about what Maxey could be, the contract control, whatever, you have to remember the Nets want to be competitive going forward, right? And whether that's the right decision or not, I don't know. I actually don't. Like, if you're looking at this and saying, we want to continue to sell tickets, we want to continue to, build what we're building here and have a winning culture in Brooklyn, I get that. Maybe Ben Simmons and Jaylen Brown is a fun, I don't know, what's 6th seed. I don't know how high I can really go with that. And yeah, sure, you'd be a playoff team, but I think the Nets want to remain that way. They want to remain in that playoff hunt in a way. That said, I don't know if that's the right call. If you're just viewing this from like a, hey, like we want to sell a vision here.
Especially for next year, right?
I would, even the next couple of years, I think it's more like, fans, if you're a Nets fan, you'd be more excited about having Tyrese Maxey, this young player, because you can always sell yourself on
the future.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's why so many GMs now, I think, are trading away superstars and just taking in as many picks as possible, because it's like, well, we don't know, like maybe we get whatever some ridiculous.
We might get the next Paul Reed.
Right. Yeah. We could get Malachi Flynn Jr. Like, we don't know here.
I'm telling you, dude. Come on. Don't sleep on Mally. But actually, just cutting off here. Sorry to cut you off, but like the thing that you're talking about right now, like, just for context, if you traded for Maxey, you would be worse next year, because Jaylen Brown is currently a better NBA player than Tyrese Maxey. Even as the number one option, I think he would probably be better. All of that said, first off, it would be a little bit funny to have like the Sixers without Joel Embiid, and then maybe with like Kyrie Irving or Russell Westbrook instead, but that's besides the point. But next year, the Nets actually can be bad, because it's a swap with Houston next year, if I remember correctly. And Houston's going to be one of the 5 worst teams in the NBA next year. Mm-hmm. So if the Nets leaned into being a little bit bad, like, they're going to get a lottery pick next year, because at worst, they'll have to swap with Houston, and maybe Houston's a little bit better than expectations, but like, both of them could potentially be bad next year. And if you're just bad for 1 year, you hit on one more guy, then you have a core of Maxey, add in another young guy, and then who knows what happens with Ben. Like, I still think that Ben can be a good player. Like, I know that like most people are out on him because of the playoff stuff, but like in the regular season, if your goal is to be competitive, Ben Simmons is going to help you be a competitive regular season team. And like, I don't know, to me, like, I'm kind of selling myself on this now. Like, if your goal is to be competitive and have a long window, I actually think being bad next year is a better move, just for 1 year at least, when you have that swap, than as opposed to like being pretty good and getting a mediocre pick and not being able to really, have the options that you would have.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying exactly what I've been kind of hitting at a little bit, which is like, I don't understand the upside of trying to be competitive next year. I really don't. Like, what are you winning? Where are you going with this? Because again, as you mentioned, like Houston is going to be in the Wemby sweepstakes. Like, they're going to be there, and they should be. Every team that's sort of bad should just be bad. Just be bad. It's worth it. Like, just
that next year's draft is ridiculous.
Dude, yeah, it's crazy.
Like, even if you miss out on Wemby, Scoot, the Thompson twins, Whitmore, like, there's like a ton of guys at the top of that draft that like you could talk yourself into.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you're the Nets, like, you could potentially even be in those. I mean, I don't know how low you can sink in a way, and you have all these like win now guys like Royce O'Neal and whatever. I mean, TJ Warren, Seth Curry. Like, there's a world where if you're the Nets, you don't start off very well. You could be huge sellers at the deadline. You could bring in more draft capital. You could find a team that's desperate and says, "Oh, we really need shooting. Let's bring in Seth Curry. Ooh, Royce O'Neal. That's a 2-way wing. Let's throw up an unprotected pick in this year's draft, and we're going to be in the 20s, whatever." Like, you could kind of do that in a way. And I actually think that's probably the smartest thing to do if you're the Nets, but I don't think they're going to do that, because again, everybody is to blame here. Kevin Durant is to blame. Kyrie Irving is to blame. The Nets, from top to bottom, I think, in terms of who's making decisions right now, are to blame. It's a bunch of sides that are butting heads. Nobody's thinking clearly. Nobody's getting in a room together and saying, hey, let's try to work this out. It's just a bunch of people acting in self-interest and ego in a way. And that's why we have this ridiculous situation where, a guy's requesting a trade and saying, yeah, I want to go to like the number 1 seeds in each conference, and they shouldn't trade anything away, by the way. And then the Nets are like, yeah, you know what? We're going to ask, we actually want to get like 2 young stars back. Let's say 7 picks. It's just like, what is the resolution to this in a way?
Right. I actually, and I've understood it more from the Nets perspective of kind of what Morey did with Ben Simmons, but you have Kevin Durant, so it's different because it's Kevin Durant, but like shooting for the moon because you never know what, yeah, we'll ask for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. We're never going to get Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, but maybe they'll be like, okay, well, Jaylen Brown could be discussed. It's Kevin Durant. Like, we're willing to do that. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like both sides are going to get what they want, really. And yes, Durant does have 4 years left on his deal, which means something. But I'm not sure how much it means, like, compared to before, at least.
These extensions don't mean anything anymore.
Exactly.
Nets fans are like, oh, we got Kevin Durant till 2026. And I remember the day it happened, I was like,
nope.
I don't know. Do you really? And it was, no, He didn't last the extension didn't even hit. So,
yeah. Oh, my God. When we extended Joel, I was like, we'll probably trade him halfway through this contract. Like, shit's probably going to the Ben Simmons shit's already blowing up. Let's be realistic. Like, Joel might only have 2 or 3 good years left in him anyway. So, like, who knows how this stuff's going to unfold. But, like, it does feel as though this is it would be smart from the net side to drag this into training camp, at least to me. Like, it would be smart to, like, try to go as far as you possibly can before you actually have to play basketball games and risk Kevin Durant sitting out, to basically try to get whatever package is out there for. And look, I know that who was it? Chris Haynes? Someone came out and said, I can't remember who it was, but they came out and they said, like, Durant will sit out, basically. Like, just because he loves basketball doesn't mean he's not going to want to sit out. Like, maybe Harden's been teaching him some things behind the scenes. Like, listen, you got to threaten to sit out, go to a strip club. Maybe there will be another pandemic. Maybe you can scare off everyone and then you'll show up out of shape. It's hard for you.
The bodysuit Durant's going to be, he's going to show up with it.
Yeah. Like, I know you can't really put on weight, but still at the same time, like, you got to at least fake it a little bit. But my whole thing on this is, like, I don't really see a resolution probably until training camp. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. I am very excited once again to talk about Philly sports trips, and Eagles season is upon us. You know it is, because every day people are fighting on Twitter about whether Jalen Hurts is good or not. They just had an open practice the other night. Everyone is very, very excited for the Eagles season, and I personally am too. So you can catch multiple trips through Philly Sports Trips. As always, they are going to provide you with a 5-star hotel, transportation, whether that's bus or flight to the game. You're going to get a great tailgate with other Philadelphia sports fans. It's going to be an awesome time filled with food and drink. It's going to be great. Please check out link in the description for Philly Sports Trips. You can go on September 11th to Detroit to see them face off against the Lions when they kick off the season. And then in addition to that, we got the big game in Washington against Carson Wentz. They're going to have so many Eagles fans down there. They're trying to get 1,000 Eagles fans to go down on the buses to go yell at Carson Wentz. They're going to do Foles chants. They're going to be chanting for Jalen Hurts. And let's be honest, the Eagles are going to win that game very easily. The reports coming out is that Wentz looks terrible in camp, so it's going to make this game even more fun. So definitely check that out. Please support if you can. It supports the podcast. It also supports Philly Sports Trips, which is a great company that we want to continue to support. So please check out the link in the description and book your trip today. What I want to get into now, which is weirdly enough, you know me.
I'm on that. Hold on, can I push back?
Yeah,
on
no,
that?
push back on it. Yeah, for sure.
Because all right, so let's say we know what the big suitors are, and Boston's one of them. Let's say Boston just starts off 18-2, and it's like, all right, we have this team. They probably will. It's the revenge season. Then you lose one of the biggest suitors in the market, and I'm just saying this from like somebody who's followed the Nets and covered the Nets for 4 years since I moved out here. nothing ever goes well for the Nets. Like the ideal situation that we're all talking about being like, well, you know, like there could be the Pelicans and they could have this really good start and Zion could be an MVP candidate. Like that stuff never happens for the Nets in a way. Right. So it's like probably what's actually going to happen is the Pelicans are going to be like a solid team. They're going to be like, I don't know. We kind of like Ingram and Zion together. Boston's just on a tear. They're like, we're not doing this. And then then they're left with like the Philly option. And it's like, well, I guess we're just going to do like, that's how there are two sides to this. And yeah, we can say waiting is better, but we just don't know that. And I think that's kind of like the risk that you run in a way, and holding Durant out, that intensifies any questions that you have about him. If you're another team, you're saying, wow, this guy, we thought he was all about basketball. He just wanted to go out and hoop. That's his big thing. But he's now not playing. He's pulling a Ben Simmons in a way. And it's like you run that risk, I think, a little bit. I mean, that's what Morey did last year. He was able to win that battle. But you don't always know. But did he even? Like,
yeah, like that's
what Harden looks like.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he won. He might have won the battle long term because we don't know if Ben is ever like going to be Ben again. Like if the mental thing is really bad and like he's just not ever really able to get back to the place where he was, then it's possible that like Ben is just not the same guy, which would suck. Yeah. But at the same, like it just from a pure like winning a trade thing, like yes, getting a guy in James Harden who can actually play basketball games is obviously a win, and was very good in the regular season.
Elevated the team, yes,
yeah, elevated the team for sure. And like you know, in the playoffs, he's always had his issues in the playoffs, and will probably continue to have his issues, which is why I don't know, maybe getting one of the 5 greatest offensive players of all time would be like a good move. It's just a thought, but. Like my whole thing on this is you're not wrong in that there are things that can go wrong for sure. But at the same time, if my offers out there are not offers I want to take right now, the downside to me is like the difference between like a pick and I'm like, fuck it, I'm risking it. I'm not like, I'll take the off chance that some team gets desperate or some team doesn't start out the way that they want to start out. Like I'll take the off chance that I might be able to get a better package that will actually change my fortunes, as opposed to like maybe a slightly worse package from the Celtics or the Sixers or whoever is out there in a few months. And like, either way, we're going to have to go through a rebuild. Like it's just like, what really is that massive difference to you? And if the Nets whole thing is like, we're going to take every asset. Well, there's one team where you can take every asset, and there might not be great assets, but the Sixers are probably the only team, because I think Morey's sick enough that he would just be like, fuck it, we're going all in, we're doing whatever we can to do it. And once again, would break my heart. But at the same time, like I still feel like we're very far, far away from this thing having a resolution. Like I don't think this is going to happen in the next week or two.
No.
Is to say, and training camp starts in what, a month and a half? Like it's not far away. So we'll see. Yeah. But before all of this craziness came out, all of this news, I wanted to have you on, and we're going to do something for the first time on here, which is the KD quotes got me thinking, which was basically, you know what's coming. The KD quotes got me thinking about Sean Marks as a GM. I had someone on the podcast a few months ago, my buddy John Hill from Twitter, who was like, Sean Marks is a fraud. And I was like, really? Like, I think he's done like a pretty good job. Like, that's weird that you would think that. And I wonder, with all this stuff that's come out with KD, like, what is the public perception on him as a GM? Because I went through history, and we're going to talk about this. This is a section we're going to call SLOP TRIAL. It's like mock trial, but it's with a GM, and we're going to go through and we're going to tell you whether he's a fraud or not. Is he a good GM? Is he a fraud GM? And we'll come to a verdict at the end whether Sean Marks is a good GM or a fraud GM, just based on his track record and what he inherited. Because everyone always talks about with this stuff with the Nets about the 2013 horrible trade that they made, which ended up being Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and the pick that was Colin Sexton in a loaded draft in 2018. But to me, the most shocking thing that I feel like no one ever talks about is the fact that they gave up the pick that became Damian Lillard in 2012 for Gerald Wallace, who was 2 years removed from an all-star game and on a bad contract. And in the middle of the season when they knew they were bad, they gave up a top 3 protected pick to get Gerald Wallace because everyone thought at the time the 2012 draft was a 3-player draft. It was AD, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, and Bradley Beal. Well, little did we know that one of the greatest players of all time was going to go with the 6th pick, which is what the Nets traded away in that trade. I feel like no one ever talks about this, and I totally forgot about it until I researched this.
Yeah, it's definitely forgotten. I think the Celtics trade kind of overshadows it, but yeah, no, that's a good one. I mean, I know Billy King is somewhere lurking on Twitter, and he'll block anybody, but I think if that one comes out, he'll block whoever puts that out. So we're gonna get blocked. I think
he's probably already got me blocked. I tweet enough about the Sixers that I probably said some shit about Billy King because he also was a terrible GM for us for a stretch too. So, So this is what he inherited. That 2012 pick they send out that becomes Damian Lillard. We all know that when he gets hired because of the fact that the whole experiment before him goes miserably. They trade for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. Paul Pierce is gone after 1 season, which is also not very talked about very much. Kevin Garnett's only there for 2 years. In his 2nd year, he's coming off the bench because he's so old at that point. They basically decided that after they made all these all-in moves, they had a ton of, they were like 65 million over the cap, which now is funny when you look back on it because you're like, their whole salary was only like 100 million and they were 65 million over. Like, what the fuck was the salary cap before the 2016 spike? But they bring in Sean Marks, who inherits one of the worst situations in the NBA. They don't have their pick in 2016. They don't have their pick in 2017. They don't have their pick in 2018. He gets hired in 2016. So in his first year, we'll just talk about his first year a little bit, 2016. He picks up Spencer Dinwiddie and Joe Harris in free agency as veteran minimum signing.
Joe Harris is coming out of like surgery, I think, on I don't remember, some lower extremity. He got cut by Orlando. Like it was like a whole thing. Yeah, pretty crazy.
Yeah. So as Zach Lowe says, he got them off the scrap heap.
The Schnorps,
the Schnorps and the Vorps and the Blorps and he had it somewhere deep in a spreadsheet that Joe Harris was like one of the best shooters in the NBA. Dinwiddie, who had bounced around from team to team, was basically a nobody at that point, was a 2nd round pick, just like Joe Harris. No one really thought much of it when they picked them up. Those are 2 kind of under the radar moves that he makes in 2016. Dinwiddie goes on to become obviously a very good player, and until he got injured, he was, a 20-point per game scorer. He was a great 6-man for those Nets teams, became a starter eventually and was a very effective pick and roll guy. Joe Harris, one of the best 3-and-D guys in the NBA, one of an underrated defender because he's a white guy. And and obviously one of the best shooters in the NBA. Incredible. I think him or Seth? God, the Nets have 2 of the greatest catch and shoot guys of all time. Like, might be 1 and 2 if I remember correctly. Maybe with Steve Kerr up there. So they get Joe Harris, and then 2016 draft comes around, and they get Karis LeVert. And I looked back at the 2016 draft, and I know LeVert was a little bit older in that draft. He was like 22 or 23. I think he was the oldest player in that.
Ton of injuries in college too. Like his story is crazy. I think he sent like letters to God, I don't remember what level it is. I remember I wrote about this like a couple of years ago, but yeah, he like sent like letters begging GMs to like give him a chance. Like his story is wild. Like he should not have, gotten to where he did. So yeah, no.
2000, I think he was the 19th pick, if I remember correctly. So that was the 2016 draft. Has all these injuries, is thought of to be like kind of an upside swing type guy, which he definitely showed flashes of when he was healthy. I mean, he's had multiple over 40-point games with the Nets, with the Pacers. Like
traded for Thad Young too, by the way, which is
traded for Thad Young, who was left over from the previous front office, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And so traded for Thad Young, who obviously is a pretty decent role player, but when he was trying to rebuild, there are a few kind of trades. I joke with you. I was like, this guy, how many fucking 1st-round picks does this guy trade for? It's crazy how many late or mid and late 1st-round picks he got. But just to wrap up the LeVert point, like, he actually, if you look at where he went in this draft, the only guys that were drafted after him in the rest of the draft that were better than him are Pascal Siakam, who was completely out of nowhere, really. Like, I mean, like one of the craziest development stories of all time. DeJounte Murray, who people weirdly thought had like off the court issues. I don't really remember, but I know that he was projected to go much. I know it's funny now that we're getting all these things about him being an asshole and all that stuff. Yeah. No. It is funny, kind of the timing of it, but yeah, you know, like abusing teenagers and stuff on the court. And guys who work like, you know, as like plumbers and like throwing the basketball off their head. Maybe that's why he fell in the draft. But my point here is that like DeJounte, who would have went higher if it weren't for whatever the off the court stuff people were worried about, and Malcolm Brogdon, who also would have went higher if it weren't for all the injuries, are the only guys drafted after him that are better NBA players. So like there are 3 guys after LeVert goes in that draft that I would consider better NBA players. So in his first offseason, he gets Dinwiddie, Harris, and LeVert. So we're off to a pretty good start, I would say.
Yep. Yeah. Like, and like LeVert, like, I mean, we you know, LeVert kind of has, I don't think his career has gone the way that at least Nets fans or whoever it really thought it was going to go. But like, he was like, there were real discussions about, is this the guy? Like, is this the 3rd star next to KD and Kyrie? Like, would you rather have him or Drew Holiday? Like, those questions were out there as recent as the bubble. So it's like, this was like a guy, like they had like a guy that was legitimately a real trade piece for them in the height of, I guess, you know, whenever they were trying to figure out that 3rd star situation. So yeah, I mean, this is, all 3 guys are pretty huge for them, and still are to a degree in their respective situations.
Yeah, and like the whole thing with LeVert is like, I've never been a big LeVert guy. I was not arguing that he was better than Jaylen Brown, like some psychotic people were on the internet, like a few years ago. But all things considered, for where he went in the draft with the 19th pick, like that's an absolute hit. Like most guys that get taken in that range are like fringe rotation guys, like at best, probably like a solid rotation guy, unless you have one of those outlier, really good picks late, like Tyrese Maxey, who we talked about earlier. Like the large majority of dudes who go in that range are not as good as Caris LeVert. Like the average 19th overall pick is not nearly as good as him. So that is absolutely a hit, especially considering there's only 3 players in the rest of that draft from 20 to 60 that were even better than him, and all required context there. So I think that's a pretty good first draft.
I can read you the number 20 picks as early as 2019. Tybal, Okogie, Giles, Harry Giles, DeLon Wright, Bruno Caboclo, Tony Snell, Evan Fournier, Monty Eunice, James Anderson. That's from 2019 going back 10 years. So like
exactly.
Yeah, it's like he's in the top 3, I guess, portion of that. Yeah.
It's like him, Fournier, like the large majority of the guys that go in that range with that pick, like, are just never that good. So like already we're starting with him finding 2 guys off the scrap heap and hitting on this. So these are the good moves that I'm going to read off. The absolute home run move that he made in the next draft was Jared Allen. So Jared Allen, the crazy thing about this is that one of the moves I almost put in the bad category for his moves was actually related to this. He traded Bojan Bogdanovic to the Washington Wizards for the pick that became Jared Allen. So it was like the 23rd pick, I believe. It was somewhere in that range. I think it was the 23rd pick. 22. Which you ask me, would I rather have Bojan Bogdanovic or the 22nd pick? I'm taking Bojan Bogdanovic. Like, he's like a pretty good player and like was good for the Nets and then ended up going to the Wizards, but he was on an expiring another weird move where he's on an expiring contract and he got a 1st round pick for this guy halfway through the season at the trade deadline. Bojan doesn't even stay with the Wizards after the season, goes to the Pacers in free agency, who gave him a bunch of money. So you get a guy who you were going to let walk anyway, and then you get the chance to draft Jared Allen, who ends up, if you look at where he went in this draft, there's no one after him that's even remotely as good as him, and except for like OG Anunoby. It's like literally him and OG are, and Jared Allen being an all-star, being as impactful defensively as he is now, like in Cleveland. Like, I think he's very clearly the best guy in this range and for where he was picked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, and so that you're looking at, and I think it's interesting. Well, I'm going to tie it back. I'm sorry. I'm throwing it back to the last section, but if I'm surprised for the Nets, knowing that you have Sean Marks, you've gotten, pick somebody like Jared Allen for an expiring. Why would you not want to be sellers this year? You could say, hey, look what maybe we get like pick number 21 for Seth Curry, who's an expiring, but why would we not want to do that again, knowing what we were able to do? Because Marks was like really prolific with these late 20s picks.
Sure.
That was the history of it, really leading up to this point. This is what did we say this was? He made this pick 2017. Up to 2017, Marks is like batting 1,000. And I truly mean that in terms of every single pick that he made. He hit on every single fringe move that he could possibly do. Like, we're looking at a guy, like, at this point, his pedigree is up to here in terms of being a GM.
Yeah, and so that's another thing to me that's interesting, because I guess you're kind of putting yourself in the same situation that you were in. Oh, by the way, Sean, rebuild the team and we have none of our picks. But he's apparently pretty good at it. Like, he at least figured out a way to make the 18-19 Nets into like a scrappy 6 seed that a lot of these moves led to.
Right. And it's a little different because you have most likely, like, you're going to have 2 top 20, let's say top 18 to top 30 guys in Simmons and whoever it is, maybe a Jaylen Brown. Like, you are afforded a little bit more of a luxury in that you're not going to fully bottom out the way you did previously when Sean first took over general manager duties. Which is fine, by the way, because you don't have any of your picks. So, but I do think, like, in a way, like, I would be sellers in the little places that you can, while also still remaining competitive in a way.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense to me. And like, I'm looking at this now, and it's like, once again, talking about, like, he really was creative with the salary dumps.
Yeah,
they were using their space to get salary dumps. They got DeMarre Carroll, who actually had a few decent seasons I think he had 2 decent seasons with the Nets, if I remember correctly, before he left. And they got a first in that from Toronto, which they ended up using on
my boy Zana Musa. One of my favorite Nets. I literally just threw up a clip on my Twitter today of Zana Musa. I'm doing a TJ Warren like scouting video right now. And there was a game against the 2019-2020 Nets, and I saw a clip of Musa, Rodions Kurucs, who was the other pick that they got. For DeMarre Carroll, or taking on DeMarre Carroll, and then Theo Pinson. So I was just like, God, like,
Nets legends, all Nets legends
right there. So, yeah, classic season. Yeah, I'm sure you do that with like process Sixers too.
Oh, of course, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Theo Pinson is more known for being on the bench literally than he is for being on the court. Between that Nets team and the Mavs this year with him, like the controversy with that, he's known for being the guy that sits on the bench. But okay, so my whole thing with this is like, all right, so they get DeMarre Carroll and a first. They end up taking on Kenneth Faried in a future salary dump, and they get a first for that as well. Like, so you're talking about multiple guys that you're just getting first round picks. You're just taking shots on guys, right? Musa obviously doesn't end up working out, but then later you're able to flip Musa and a second round pick for Bruce Brown. Yep. Who was drafted actually after him in Musa, like just after Musa in that draft. So I do just want to say, from a drafting standpoint, the Musa pick was bad because a lot of really good guys went right after him, like legitimately really good for late first, second round guys. I have a list here of, in the next 10 picks after Musa, Devontae Graham, Mitchell Robinson, Jalen Brunson, and Gary Trent Jr. So that is probably Marks's biggest draft miss. But you're not going to hit on every single pick that you make, especially when you're drafting at the end of the first. Yeah. So I'll give him a little bit of leniency there for sure. Like that's at least understandable to me, especially because by the end of his rookie contract, he was able to get a useful player in Bruce Brown back for Musa.
Yeah, I think the Bruce Brown move is like the peak of the, like, I guess the last, and it's really hard to say as we're going to go through Marks's free agent draft history, probably more the free agent history, but it's hard to tell what level of, I don't want to say input he has because obviously he's the general manager, but there were just more heads at the table. I think it's probably a good way to put it in a lot of the moves that have been made over the last 3 years. So that Bruce Brown move to me is that's like one of his last, like, oh, that's a Sean Marks move. Like,
savvy.
that is a savvy move.
Very savvy, good move from a good GM for sure. Okay. So the Kenneth Faried thing, this is what I was joking about with you earlier with the late first round picks. Like, it was scrambling my brain trying to keep up with how many times. So in the Faried thing, he gets the pick that's eventually traded to the Clippers that becomes Kabengele. And then in the 2020 draft, they trade that pick they got from the Clippers, so they traded that first for the next year's first. So in the 2019 draft, they take Kabengele. The Clippers send their 2020 first to the Nets, or is it the Sixers 2020 first? I know this is all incredibly confusing, but the Nets end up getting the Sixers pick, which turns out to be like the 19th or 20th pick in the draft. And then they trade it for Landry Shamet, who's on the Clippers. And then they flip it to the Pistons for Luke Kennard and then they draft Sadiq Bey with the pick, which is
an L, by the way. That's the first like big,
that's an L.
All right, and that was something that was like, that's a Sean Marks move, and it involves picks, and it's like the Nets could have. I mean, I'm pretty sure Bey had a Nets hat on that night. I'm sure you can find that on draft night. You could have
had Sadiq Bey, you could have had Desmond Bane, you could have had Tyrese Maxey with that pick. Those are the three guys. And by the way, this is not revisionist history. We all knew that those guys were going to be like, Bey had a little bit more skepticism, but everyone knew, like, he went to Villanova. He's a wing. He can shoot. Like, we knew that he was going to be a solid rotation player in the NBA at worst. And getting those guys on your rookie contracts, like he did in other drafts, is very important when you're a contending team. And to trade for Landry Shamet in that position is not a great move, I would say.
No, and I like Bane and people were really high on Bey. It wasn't like people were looking. I'm like, all right, this is gonna be one of the best 3-and-D wings in the league. But it was like very clear that he was gonna be like a contributor, and Bane was kind of the same way. So and especially for the Nets where they were and what they were looking for. I mean, even at that point, they needed 3-and-D guys. They needed guys that were gonna space the floor around. This Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant iteration of the Nets. Just guys that are contribute and know what they're doing essentially out there. And that was not what they ended up with, and Shamet was fine. But
he was
we know what Shamet is. Like, he's somebody you probably don't see after one round of the playoffs. And that just is, a variety of reasons, creation, his defensive ability in terms of, he's always going to be a guy that's going to be targeted by opposing teams. And that's the decision the Nets made that year. And that was a big mistake. And even when the trade happened, and especially the first month after, Landry came in really cold that year, fans were upset. That was the first time that there was like a little, Sean Marks was untouchable at that point. I remember that year really, really well. And it was the first time that fans were like, all right, I don't know. This was kind of not a great move that Sean made. So,
And so the biggest red flag to me, if I'm Sean Marks in this situation, is Landry Shamet's getting traded for the second time by a team, and this team is not wanting to extend him because
a playoff team, by the way,
a playoff team that has Kawhi Leonard and Paul George wants to be competitive, and they're willing to trade this guy. Just after the Sixers traded him like a year and a half ago. Like, I would have been like, there might be something weird going on here with Landry Shamet if this is the case. Look, maybe they looked at him like, we need movement shooters, we need guys who can space the floor, like you said, but like there were enough red flags there with Landry Shamet that at the time I was like, okay, like whatever. And then also in retrospect, it's just really not that great of a move. The one thing he did salvage from this is the fact that at the next draft, I joke about this all the time. It's a good bit that everyone is just like, we're going to trade Landry Shamet at the draft again. Like, it's just a continuous bit by every GM in the NBA. But at the next draft, they trade Landry Shamet for Javon Carter, who was like okay for the Nets, but like, he not very good.
No, he was not very good. I would like Javon Carter too coming into that. He played pretty well for Milwaukee. It just didn't work. I mean, that team was such a
Yeah.
mess for a million reasons. And that,
Sure.
like, even like every single thing that could have gone wrong, in terms of off-season moves just did for whatever reason last year. Paul Millsap was, the Paul Millsap that we saw last year. Blake Griffin.
He was cooked.
He was cooked. Blake Griffin, I think, made 2 threes before the turn of the new year. Like, Aldridge was fine, but every single move that could have gone wrong kind of did. And Carter was one of those guys where it was like, yeah, this just isn't going very well. And by the way, there was still like a 1 seed coming into the new year because Durant was that damn good. Damn good.
We forget that this guy that people
he's good. Like, he's really good. I don't get it. I'm like, I feel like I'm losing my mind a little bit this offseason.
I am. I literally am every week on the podcast. I'm like staring into the camera like, this is Kevin Durant.
Yeah.
But they at least get another first round pick in that trade. I believe that was the pick they took Daron Sharp with, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
With the Suns pick. Okay, yeah. So like, jury's still out. Like, we'll see how Sharp is. Like, I know he has fans. A lot of people like him. I don't really know all that much about him. I'm not going to sit here and act like
Paul Reed.
Okay, there we go. That's a good thing to be then. Hopefully you guys don't get a coach that fucking hates playing young players. So those were like, that's just kind of a little bit of context of like what the kind of GM that Sean Marks is overall. Like, he likes to try to get these mid to late first round picks when he can. Generally speaking, he's only extending guys that are like, I would say like his guys. Like, he extended Joe Harris. He extended Spencer Dinwiddie one time. He extended LeVert. He would have extended Allen if he weren't involved in the Harden trade, which I don't know if you listened to Bill, but like Bill's.
I don't know if they would have ever extended.
You don't think they would have extended him?
I didn't get the sense that was going to be something that was going to happen. I think that's why.
Okay, well then we should include this in the bad part, because if they didn't want to, and I actually, you could find a tweet that I have from the day that the Harden trade was made, and I said I actually think Cleveland's the biggest winner of all of this, because I think Jared Allen's really good. Like, Jared Allen was one of the few centers in the NBA that he actually had Joel Embiid used to bully him, and he had kind of figured him out. I remember they had one matchup and he played him really tough. And I was incredibly impressed with how much better Jared Allen got throughout the years from that Sixers playoff series up through that. And I was like, I like Jared Allen a lot. I didn't think he was going to be an all-star. I'm not going to sit here and say I did, but I also thought, like, for what he is, like, I remember people freaking out when he got that contract. I was like, he's a good player. Like, that's what good players get paid. Like, to me, it's not that big a deal. If he didn't want to extend him, I would say that's a little bit of a question mark to me, because I do think that he was a good player and he would have been a decent fit on that Nets team.
That's where it gets tricky too, because you have ownership coming in as well. So that's another thing that we have to factor in, because that team was going to get very expensive. And I think there was a sense of like, all right, if we can, let's consolidate and try to put together assets, and try to get a third star, not only because we want to put a third star next to Kyrie and KD, but this team is also going to get really expensive because we have Karis LeVert and Spencer Dinwiddie around, and Jared Allen. Like, there was kind of like, hey, we can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So I think that line of thought was there for sure when that trade was made.
Also, a lot of teams just don't like to pay centers. So I understand that a little bit, especially in the modern NBA. There's only a few guys that you really want to pay. And if Jared Allen, like, isn't the player that he is now, like, obviously people probably look at that deal that he got and they're like, that's a good deal, if anything. Like, I mean, like, he's probably playing close to a $30 million a year player, and you have him on, like, I think he makes like 24, 25 a year or something, whatever it is. But yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some moves that were like, you could really go either way on. Let's talk about the big one, which is like one of his more signature moves, which is the D'Lo trade. Because at the time, I love the idea behind the D'Lo trade, by the way. Like, guy was the 2nd pick in the draft, has a falling out with his first team. You still see the talent with D'Angelo Russell in, like, maybe you have some question marks about, like, is he immature? And, like, is he just not athletic enough to be like a number 1 legit option on a team? Like, is he a good enough shooter? Whatever it is. You have all these question marks about D'Angelo Russell, but I like the idea of making a trade like this, where you're taking on a bad contract in Mozgov to get that, like, really good, legit young player that you think you can build around moving forward. They gave up Brook Lopez, who somehow got even better after they moved on from him, is now like a key cog on a championship team with the Bucks. and they gave up so they drafted Kyle Kuzma. Is that correct?
Yeah.
They drafted Kuzma, and then they traded him after, which I had totally forgotten. I thought that they traded the pick and the Lakers picked Kuzma, but they picked Kuzma and then they traded him after. So like Kuzma turned out to be a pretty good role player too. So like you could look at this trade either way. You could look at it as like D'Angelo Russell, like, or like it's a smart upside swing move for like Brook Lopez and Kyle Kuzma weren't going to change your world anyway if they're like two of your best players.
I'm gonna put it like this because I think that this is important to say. Like trading for D'Angelo Russell and having that, what was that, 2016 or 2017, 2018 year, where you become this, whatever, you're this plucky young team, you make the playoffs. Russell was a huge engine behind that. I mean, he was really good, I think, January. And by the way, I went to those games and they were horrible. Like all through December, they were awful. Like they were just getting like the shit kicked out of them in night after night after night. And they turned this around because Russell gets hot. That whole run right there, in terms of them elevating themselves to be like, hey, we're not the Knicks. That, as you said, like, we're not this. That is why you have Kyrie Irving, who eventually brought in Kevin Durant in the door. Sure. So I think in a way, we can look at it and say, hey, in a vacuum, would you rather have Brook Lopez and Kyle Kuzma or D'Angelo Russell? I actually would probably venture Brook Lopez and Kyle Kuzma. But for me, looking at what it meant to this franchise and just knowing like how big it was for them to be competitive that year and how like much of an engine Russell was to that, alongside Dinwiddie and Joe Harris and to a lesser degree, Jared Allen. But really, Russell was the centerpiece of that. I think that for me swings this as a good move because that got you to the point where you're able to attract multiple superstars.
Sure. Yeah. And so even though they ended up not working out, like everyone was afraid of this Nets team a year ago. Yeah. This Nets team was supposed to be like, I still defend the Harden all-in type move. Me too. Because of the team that it made them. Like I still am, to this day, would have made that move if I were the Nets in their position. I was very mad when the Sixers were not able to get him the first time around because of the fact that I thought that it would make the Nets unbeatable. And let's be honest, if they don't get injured, they probably do win at least one title, and it makes all of this worth it. So I think your point is a strong one, which is that like everything that D'Lo did in that 1 year, and maybe he was hot shooting wise, and he had the floater percentage was like crazy high, and like he wasn't going to ever be that kind of player again. But like all you needed was that one good competitive year where you're the scrappy 6 seed playoff team. You take a game off the Sixers in the first round and you make some noise and you make it known that you're not as shitty and as incompetent as the Knicks, and you can be a team that attracts superstars and eventually gets 3 of the best players to ever play the sport. So like that point, I totally understand. And that might be a feather in his cap, to be honest. So there's that. And then let's just run through some smaller moves he made. Jeremy Lin in free agency, he played decent, I think, for like 1 year for the Nets, and then he got hurt, and then they ended up having to trade him, and it just didn't really work out. They paid him probably too much in free agency. That was during the cap spike year where they threw out a few different offer sheets to guys.
Johnson, Otto Porter Jr. Yeah, they're the classics.
Alan Crabb too, right?
Yep.
That was the guy. Yeah, which is a move that I actually have under the bad category, which is that they threw that huge huge offer sheet at Alan Crabb, and then a few months later traded for Alan Crabb anyway, even though like I know they traded Andrew Nicholson, who like is like nothing, but who they got in the Bojan Bogdanovic trade. But at the same time, like, I don't know, trading for Alan Crabb, making that much money. Eventually they had to use a first round pick to get off it and salary dump him to the Hawks
for Prince.
So that for Taurean Prince, so that they could open up that cap space. And that pick ended up becoming Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but it was the 17th pick. And with the Nets history of how they pick, like that could have been a valuable pick for them. So I would say those are moves that I was like, the Lin one, like whatever, the Crab move and having the salary dump to get off of him not that far after you trade for him, like I didn't like those moves at all, to be honest.
Yeah, I remember that being spun as like, oh, I think Prince is worth like a first rounder.
Yeah. Okay. And then you had to extend him too. Yeah. They gave him $13 million a year after that. And like, he's a fine player.
Which was what they needed to get Harden in. I will say that. Like they needed that salary to get there. So yeah. But
they had chess, 7-dimensional chess they were playing.
They should have just kept Crab to make salary.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, so those were some moves that I didn't like. Another savvy-ish move, because of the way that it turned out, was something we discussed on the last podcast, which was so first off, they traded for Jahlil Okafor, Nick Stauskas, and those guys were not the reason that this trade was good, because all they gave up was Trevor Booker, who sucked for us and did nothing. And we might as well have never made that trade. It was so stupid. But the idea behind it was, well, let's see what Jahlil Okafor has. Let's see if he's worth kind of doing what we did with D'Angelo Russell. Like maybe we could just trade for everyone from the 2015 draft and see if they all are really shitty or they're good. Like we'll figure it out. So Ja ends up being nothing. He leaves. Stauskas is out of the league pretty shortly after this. But the main good savvy-ish move here is the fact that they get the Knicks second round pick that in 2019 ends up being the first pick in the second round, and they get Nick Claxton, who's a good rotation player for them now.
Yeah. It's a very good move. Claxton just extended this offseason. So yeah, that is a really, really good move. I'm happy you brought that up. I forgot how all that came about, honestly. So thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, I when I was going through here, because Adam had brought that up on the last podcast, because I was like, who did they end up taking with that Knicks pick? And he said Nick Claxton, and I was like, of course they fucking took someone who's like a legit player, because we gave up so many seconds and firsts to get guys that just ended up doing nothing for us during that Colangelo and the cronies years. But like, all I'm saying is, so far we've gotten pretty far, and I haven't even gotten to like that. Like, I don't think there's been any disastrous moves. I think most of the moves have been savvy, or like at least I got the idea behind them. Like, I maybe didn't love every move, but like you could justify it to me, except for like, I didn't love the Landry Shamet move. I didn't love like the Allen Crabbe stuff, but like, once again, maybe that's just overvaluing shooting a little bit. Maybe that's just like the idea of the kind of players that they wanted to have, and it fit that mold. But now let's just get into like, and I hated the Musa pick, obviously, like, but that's also in retrospect. I don't even remember what Musa was.
Slander my guy, man.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's easy for me to sit here and be like, well, actually, I would have. I'm also a Philadelphia guy, so I obviously I didn't understand why Jalen Brunson went in the second round of that draft. I was like, This guy's clearly a first round talent, and like it was easy to see when he was in college that like he was going to be an NBA player. So him falling that far never made any sense to me. But all right, so let's get into the last few moves that I did not like, other than the ones that we've already mentioned, which is the D'Lo sign and trade to the Warriors. And like, look, maybe we discussed this. Maybe we talked about it in the 2019 offseason resloppables. Maybe it was because of the money, because if they did a sign and trade, KD and Kyrie could have got more money or whatever it was.
No, it was to bring in DeAndre
Jordan. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It was technically because it would create enough space that they could give DeAndre Jordan more money and all of this shit. Like, look, I get it. If like the cost of getting KD and Kyrie is bringing in DeAndre Jordan on that contract, I get it. But also you have to sit down with them and be like, we can't give DeAndre Jordan this much money. He sucks. He is terrible. We're not giving DeAndre Jordan this big contract. Like I'm not saying, like, I guess you do have to cater a little bit, but the whole point of this conversation is like, are these Sean Marks moves or are they Kevin Durant's moves? And Kyrie Irving.
The DeAndre one, I think we know. I think we know pretty clearly that was something that was a deal breaker for them. Because there's the whole like 4 a.m. FaceTime. They all got together and like, oh, we should all play together. Like it's like the same thing as every time Harden and KD get into a gym in LA. They're like, we should get together again.
Come on, let's get back together. It's gonna work this time. time. Third time's the charm, baby.
That's what it was. It was this 4 a.m. FaceTime that I remember was reported on a bunch between Kyrie and KD and DJ. So yeah, I think that was a package deal the whole time.
Okay, so if that's the case, then we can't even hold this against Marks.
I mean, that's what's so tricky about the last couple of years is like it's really hard to tell who's behind what. Even the head coach, like there are so many leaks going on between, oh, this was a KD guy, this was a Marks guy. They had this plan for 20 years. No, KD had this, this was something in KD's mind when he was in Golden State. Like it's just really hard to like piece it out, especially with how much every single side seems to be leaking, which is the messiest thing about this whole Nets debacle is that everybody seems to have a leak. The Nets have their leak, and I'm not going to get myself in trouble, but I think it's very obvious who the Nets are leaking to. I think it's very obvious who Kyrie is leaking to, peoples that he is leaking to. Durant, I think, has been pretty transparent, or his agency has been pretty transparent. So it's just like really hard to get a feel, I think, in general for the last couple of years, who's behind what move in general.
Sure. I don't want to get you in trouble, but I'll just put it like this. There's one major reporter who can't report on anything 90% of the time right now. And there's a reason why. And if Sixers fans know, go back and look at the trade deadline. He was not able to report on it until the day that the trade happened for some reason. It's really strange. He's like the biggest reporter there is.
It's vacation,
No, this guy's just not
showing pina coladas.
Yeah, like he's not cool. Battling the other guy for screen time. They're having fucking matches so you can get that 22 hours of screen time a day. But all right, let's just wrap this up on. So this is where I'm going to be critical of Sean Marks in the D'Lo sign and trade. How can you get? They got nothing. Like, you're sending Kevin Durant and you get back like a top, I think it was like a top 25 protected, or no, it was a top 20 protected first, but like there was a chance the bottom could fall out on the Warriors. Now, I guess you think about it like this, if you are the Nets, like what are the odds really of it falling out? They have Steph Curry still, they have Draymond Green still, like whatever. But there's at least a chance that pick is going to be like, I don't think anyone thought that team was going to be good. And there's a chance you're not getting any picks from this. They got 2 seconds out of it, I believe, which is the Warriors love to do that. They do those fake first trades all the time where they protect it like crazy. And then it turns into 2 seconds. Like, they're bastards when it comes to that. But my whole thing is like, if you're trading them Kevin Durant or you're trading them D'Angelo Russell, you're giving them a lifeboat. You're giving them something. Like, they have nothing. They have no way to get anything. You got to get better than a top 20 protected first round pick in that trade. That's a bad move from Sean Marks.
Yeah. And that move led to Golden State getting Andrew Wiggins
and Kuminga,
which I think you can say played a role in they won the championship because of that.
He was the second best player in the playoffs, arguably.
But you could also make the argument that happening and the Warriors winning is why Kevin Durant is now asking out. So it's funny how that, we're using our galaxy brains.
It is. That's what I'm saying here, though. It's like it actually came back to bite them in the ass somehow, which is really funny. So
they lost the guy that they signed and traded for tangentially because of that move.
Because he was in his feelings because of it. All right. And then, okay, so just my other bad moves. Obviously, I already said DeAndre Jordan signing Paul Millsap. I actually at the time was like, Millsap might, and this is 100% revisionist for me. At the time, I was like, look, Millsap was fine for Denver. Like, he's a bench and like whatever. And then I'm like, oh no, he's cooked. He's totally cooked. And this is a bad move. Like, it was pretty evident pretty fast. And then he was horrible on the Sixers too. Like, we literally ended up with both these guys somehow. And I was like screaming at Morey, like, no, what are you doing? And then the last move that he made that I just didn't like was just letting Bruce Brown walk in free agency this year.
Which I still don't understand at all. I get it. All right, is there some overlap with Simmons? But like he's been good in every iteration of the Nets. I was worried he can shoot, but even like the year when they had him and he broke out, he was like this like small ball center. He had this huge game against Golden State where he's playing next to, you know, Harden and Kyrie and KD. And then they bring all these centers in. I remember doing an article being like, yeah, I don't know how this is going to work next to Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge, who like not going to go ahead and call them floor spacers or anything like that. And he transforms his game. He starts crashing the boards like crazy. The way he was cutting was differently. And it was like, this guy has just been good in every situation except for like 2 months of the beginning of last year. So I was surprised that it's like, you don't want to bring that guy back when there's no downside to it, really. It was just very strange. So yeah, I didn't understand
get that much. They said that he said they didn't even make him a firm
they didn't
offer
him.
Yeah, that was a bad move. And like, I know that you can't blame KD and Kyrie. Like that was just that was just a bad move. And like, I'll still defend the Harden trade to this day. I will defend KD for wanting to do it and Marks for wanting to do it and all that shit. There are smaller moves that I'm critical of Sean Marks, but overall, that resume we just read down has been the resume that he's made from a transaction standpoint. He's a good GM. He is.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he had a
He's not amazing, but he's a good GM.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part. Like, he didn't have a great so the thing with Marks is like, I think holistically he's really good and he's like done a lot of really smart things. But in the year you really needed him to have like a home run off season, he just didn't really do that. Like, they built this weird team last year. And I remember watching the first game against the Bucks. I saw them like, you know, the first half, I was like, oh, I don't like what's going on here. Like, I don't like that they tried to match the Bucks in terms of, oh, we got beat up by Giannis and Brook Lopez down low. Like, let's bring in a bunch of centers and we're going to run out like LaMarcus Aldridge and Paul Millsap lineups. And we're going to have, you know, Blake Griffin next to Claxton, which like, all right, that's not a great fit. Like they built this weird team in a way for an opponent almost that didn't even make it out of the second round. And I just felt like they were really capped out last year because of how the roster was built. Now you could say, well, all right, some of those guys are KD guys that he recruited originally, you know, with LaMarcus and Blake Griffin, but it's like you still chose to bring those guys back last year. Both of them did not work out. They're both unsigned right now, by the way. Millsap, sure. Is that somebody that could have been recruited by KD? Yes, but they were also, at that point, they had a decision between Millsap and Isaiah Hartenstein, and they were in talks with Hartenstein, and they chose to go Millsap. So it's like, you look.
That's a bad move.
Bad move. Even in terms of like, they had DeAndre Bembry, Bruce Brown, and James Johnson kind of all fighting for the same roles. And sometimes they had to play multiple of those guys together. And it's like, all right, you kind of built your team in a really narrow-minded way. And I don't care how much say you're getting from your superstars in a way. You still chose to make those moves. And last year, I mean, look, the year before was probably the year, but last year was like, if you could just keep yourself afloat in a way with a roster that made some sense while Durant was injured, I think you could have survived things a little bit more. Maybe you would have been, you know, the 5 seed or something like that when he returned, if your roster was a little bit better around Harden, but instead you bought him out, you lose like 13 games in a row. And it's like, now you're here.
All of this comes back to Kyrie not being available for a chunk of these games too, though.
For sure.
And that's, like, I know that they didn't have perfect roster construction, but like, I don't know, your second or third best player not being able to play for half of the games.
That's what they lost.
Wasn't playing any games. Yeah, like that's my whole thing is like, and that's KD's guy. So like, so as much as you can point to Marks's flaws, and like honestly, the biggest mark against Marks would be the fact that he maybe wasn't ready for the moment, the championship moment.
That's how I describe it. Yeah.
Right. And he did a good job of like rebuilding the team, and he got them to the point where they can get KD and Kyrie. Maybe they needed the next guy to get them to the level of championship team that built a core around them that made sense. But all things considered, I would still say on the whole, based on everything we said, and this has nothing to do with like how he interacts with players and how all that stuff happens behind the scenes. Just from like a pure transactional standpoint, I think he's a good GM. At worst, an above average GM. And like, at the end of the day, everyone had some say in this, like you said. Like Marks had some say, KD had some say, Kyrie had some say. I'm sure Harden even had some say when he was there. Like there's blame to go around for everyone, and it is weird to me that Marks is being a bit of a scapegoat.
Yeah, I think he's the fall guy right now. Like, and I don't mean like he's going to be the guy that gets fired, because I don't think that's. I mean, the owner tweeted it, for fuck's sake.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
out there. Like, he's not going to get fired. So, but it is funny that Marks is kind of the guy that I think gets painted negatively when there just like are a lot of things that went wrong, and at this point, I don't think anybody's really in the right in terms of how things have been handled with this trade request, with the offseason. Like, everybody is to blame to some degree, some more than others, which, you know, we can look at last year for a very good example, as people being probably more to blame. But
the Nets fans who listen to this podcast, there are a few Nets fans that listen to this podcast, and they're going to be very mad at me for being critical of KD, because I've already been super critical of Kyrie, who they still like for some reason. But
I'm going to hold my tongue on that, man.
Yeah.
I'm going to hold my tongue.
Yeah, let's let Matt not get any strays after this podcast. All right. Well, that was a great conversation. I appreciate you. As always, we went on super long. I didn't expect us to go on this long, but I really appreciate your time. Everyone can follow Matt's stuff. I'm going to put the link in the description for his writing and for his Twitter. So thank you again, Matt. I had a great time.
Dude, I'm stoked to finally be on. And if you ever need a guest to talk about, I don't know, going sicko mode at Travis Scott concerts, like,
hey,
I'm the guy.
When KD gets traded to the Sixers, you're coming on the emergency stream. I'll say that much. Peace.
Cheers.